basically the entire kind of motherboard section, go through everything. Please ask questions. Please stop me if you have questions. But hopefully all this stuff you know, maybe some of it will fill in some gaps and clear up some things, because these are kind of, most of this stuff you should have looked up while you were doing your presentation. We're going to go through some of the different motherboards and make sure you understand the components and how everything works. First of all, everybody should understand at this point that the motherboard is the biggest circuit board in the computer. The whole point of the motherboard is to connect everything up with the CPU, which is where most of the processing takes place. Okay, so the motherboard, because of its form factor, determines the kind of CPU we can put in there. We know there's two CPU manufacturers. There's AMD and there's Intel. There was another one in years past, but it died. And we'll learn more about the CPU manufacturers in the next project, the next section. But the kind of motherboard and the socket that's on the motherboard determines what CPU goes in there. So we have to make sure we choose the motherboard that we want based on the CPU that we want. The motherboard also has this chipset on the board that controls the flow of information from all the components to the CPU. The motherboard also determines what kind of expansion slots we have, what we can add in the future to our PC. If we get a micro ATX with one expansion slot, it means we got one thing we could ever add on this computer. Whereas if we get a full-size ATX motherboard with 6 or 7 slots, we could obviously add many things to that computer in the future. The motherboard and the motherboard form factor also determines the type of memory that we can put in there. Does this one take DDR2? Does it take DDR3? Does it take the newest DDR4 kinds of memory? And obviously, the faster and better memory that it takes, the faster the motherboard talks, the faster the information gets to the CPU, the faster the information gets to the CPU, the faster we feel our computer runs. And then finally, the motherboard and the form factor of the motherboard determine the kind of case that we can put our computer in. Okay? We talked about how form factors determine all those things, and the fact that the way that it lays in the case, all those things are related to each other, and they'll all kind of come together as you guys do all the projects in this class. The last one will be picking out some cases that go with specific motherboards, because you will have worked your way through the motherboard now, then the CPU, then you're going to be working on the memory, then we're going to be working on video cards. We've already obviously done power supplies as a model presentation that I did. Okay, so when we talk about form factors, it's very, very specific how a form factor works. They're different sizes. You can't fit one inside the other, and nobody did that this time. We had, in years past, I had somebody come in with a mini ITX motherboard, and they present the whole thing, and yes, all the information was right, but no, it wasn't an ATX, and if it wasn't an ATX, it's not going to work for the rest of our presentation. So those form factors are very specific in size and shape and where all those holes line up. And if we don't get the right one and make sure we're working on the right one, these things aren't going to work. So a micro ATX and a standard ATX, all those holes are going to line up in the motherboard. In fact, I just put this motherboard in and took out a much smaller one. I had to change some screws to get it to work in there, but they're both ATX. So when I took out this ATX motherboard and put in that ATX motherboard, all I had to do is move one screw on the case, because they were both ATX and the case is made to take an ATX motherboard. So I was able to easily put a much upgraded...
Just an interruption. We are having trouble with Dazzle this morning. If everyone would do their attendance and either put it on the outside of their door, I will have an office aide come around and get that right now. Thank you very much.
We'll just need to be patient. It's taken. They're just being impatient. Slow isn't the same as broken. Anyway, so we know the ATX is the kind of motherboard that we're looking at, and in the ATX we've got micro, we've got standard, we've got extended ATX, but basically all the parts that we're talking about are very similar. Now, what we need to be able to do is walk around a motherboard and know the basic parts of the motherboard. I'm going to talk about some more of some blown up pictures of some of these things. But in general, ATX, we talked about, has the back panel lined up with the CPU, lined up with the memory, and all the expansion slots are off to the side. Okay? And the reason ATX was designed like that is because as we look at some cards will do this entire length. And it used to be they were in line with the CPU, with the AT motherboard, and so we got cards that couldn't fit inside a computer because their own parts would be in the way. So that was why ATX was designed the way it was. But they all lay out the same, and basically what we see is extending this way and extending this way as we see the change in the ATX. Okay. Standard ATX motherboard, we've got a couple things. We've got a standard power, and we've got a standard second power for the CPU. Okay. The only difference in these is this can be 20 or 24 pins, but mostly all are 24 pins. This can be 4 or 8 pins, and there's no, it depends on the CPU. Okay. But in both cases, no matter which way the configuration is as far as the power, it won't boot at all unless you have them both plugged in. Okay. So if we've got a PC that somebody built and it's not booting, the very first thing I check is to make sure they've got the secondary power plugged in. Okay. The very next thing I check is to make sure they've got their memory connected correctly. Oh, yeah. I just locked it instead of undoing it. Sorry about that. To hit the, I thought it was L that undid that. Was it Control L? Let's see. Control L. Yeah, okay, it's Control L. So then we off times that memory won't be fully seated, and that's why a newly made PC won't work. Because as long as I have the power on the motherboard, I've got a CPU in correctly, and I've got the memory in correctly, it should boot. Those are the only things I need to get a basic PC booting. And when we get to the troubleshooting section of this chapter, we're going to talk about the divide and conquer rule. And the divide and conquer rule basically says that you take it down to just those 3 components. You divide up all the things that could be broken so that all that's there is what you have to have, and then you slowly add things back to see what it was that made the PC not work. So we have to have those, we have to have memory, we have to have our CPU, and we have to have a fully functioning motherboard. Other than that, we don't need anything else. And power, obviously, to get it to work. So, first thing, we've got CPU sockets, and we've got 2 kinds of CPU sockets. And what are our 2 kinds of CPU sockets?
LGA.
Okay, we've got LGA, and we've got PGA sockets. Okay, and LGA stands for Land Grid Array, and PGA stands for Pin Grid Array. Okay, so the LGA socket is most commonly used by what manufacturer? Intel. Okay, and you'll see questions about that on the test. And the PGA socket is most commonly used by what manufacturer? AMD. Okay, and I say most commonly because it's not 100%. They only use this, but I'm going to say 90% of the time, that one used that and that one used that. So if there's a question showing a LGA socket and it says what kind of manufacturer CPU goes in here, the answer is Intel, realizing that yes, there is a small chance that there is an AMD socket that is LGA, but I'm talking about for the most part. When I ask that, if I ask how many holes are on an LGA socket, the answer is 0. There are no holes on an LGA socket. If I ask you on a PGA socket, well, you'd have to look it up. Okay, depending on whether it's an FM, an AM2, an AM3. I'm not going to ask you that. Okay, just so you know. But I might ask you how many holes, and you should immediately know none is the answer to that one. So we've got different kinds of memory as well as different kind of CPUs. We know we've got 2 different types of LGA versus PGA, but there's many different types from there, right? LGA, you've got a 750, you've got 1150, you've got 2011. There's multiple kinds of LGA sockets. So not only do I have to first say, yes, an Intel processor goes in this motherboard, but the next thing I need to know is what kind of socket is it on the motherboard. And if I give you something like this, how could you determine what kind of socket's on this motherboard? What would you do? Based on solely this picture.
You look at the lock on the...
Can't tell from that. Can't tell from that. There's only one way. And that is to Google the motherboard. You can't tell from looking. I can't tell from looking at to say what's what. Some of them are very, very similar. Yeah, this is probably a 750. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, it could be 1150. But if I go and I Google that motherboard and I say, okay, first of all, who made this motherboard? Asus, right? It says right on there. So it's an Asus P5AD2-E. So if I wanted to find out what kind of socket that was, all I do is say Asus, and I didn't do this in advance, P2, I can't even remember what it was, P5AD2, P5AD2, oh my gosh, P5 AD2 dash, what was the dash? Dash E?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd have to actually go to the motherboard. I'd have to Google it, and you're going to have to do this on your test. You'd have to go down to the specifications, which maybe it's just listed out throughout here. Let's see what it says. It's an LGA 775 socket. Okay, is that the same one? Let's see.
Yeah,
Does it look like the same one?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, a little different in color, but it looks like it's laid out the same, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, which is something you would obviously want to look at. Okay, so if I ask you what goes in there, you have to actually look at, okay, who's the manufacturer? What's the motherboard name? And you'd have to Google it. I mean, I don't expect you to know it. I expect you to be able to find it, though. So this is an LGA 775 socket then. And if I gave you a, hey, does this motherboard work with this CPU? Then I expect you to go and Google it, and then I expect you to look at that list that's on here, and let's see if there's a good list on this one. And like I said, I just the dual channel 64-bit CPU support. This is oh wait, there we go. That's what I wanted. I wanted the specifications page. Go in there now. There we go. Now I can get there. And so now I see it's an LGA 775 socket for Pentium 4 and Celeron CPUs. Those are much older, by the way. That's why we didn't do 775 sockets. And you guys didn't have any that used 775 sockets. But that would be the exercise. And then if I said, and if I all of a sudden showed you an i7 processor, does this work with this? The answer is no, right? Because i7 is not Pentium 4 or Celeron. So that's our CPU. Those are things that we should be able to do, be able to identify that and be able to Google this and then read the specifications and know, yes, this is this kind or this is this kind, okay? I've got two heat sinks on this motherboard. What do those signify? Northbridge and Southbridge chipsets, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit more about the chipset in a minute and what those exactly do. But those heat sinks that you see on there are for the Northbridge and Southbridge. And which one is always bigger? Northbridge is bigger, it gets hotter, so it has to be the bigger heat sink, okay? So this one's kind of close, it's kind of hard to tell on that one, the next one's not as close. They're usually very, very obvious which one's the north and which one's the south. You can see this one's slightly bigger, and the label over here does say Northbridge over there, and the label here says Southbridge right there. Okay, so the chipset controls the flow of information around the motherboard to the CPU. The Northbridge controls all the flow of information from two specific places, from the memory and from the video card. Okay, that's the only thing that goes through the Northbridge. And so when we talk about being synchronized, and when I talked about frontside bus speed, really I'm talking about the Northbridge bus speed. Okay, because everything has to go at the speed of the RAM. So if you put in slow RAM, the memory flow, the information flows through the Northbridge at the speed that it can talk to that RAM. The RAM then controls or slows down or speeds up the flow of information to the Northbridge. So that's really what we're talking about, because that's what really defines the speed of our computer. How fast we get information from our USB dongle doesn't really say, oh man, that dongle slow, this computer is slow. You know, no one says that. It's whether it does its computing and we see our graphics and those kind of things. So that Northbridge is really our primary thing that we are concerned about, okay? So those are those. Then we've got ways to connect up data to our data storage devices to our computer. We've got two, right? We've got our hard drive interfaces or our CD-ROM interfaces, and we've got, on this one, we've got both PATA down here, and we've got SATA down here. Which one's faster?
SATA.
SATA way faster, okay? And I'm going to talk about SATA speeds on another slide here in a second. Just kind of walk around this motherboard, okay? Then we've got our front side panel connectors. They're really nice and colored here. Nice, easy way to get on those if you've got the manual to look at and you guys have connected those up. We've got our universal serial bus or our USB connectors, and we can have many of those USB connectors. In this case, we've got USB connectors here and here and here, and a lot of ones have. I did mine online and it worked. The online is working just fine. It's just a little slow. Yeah, I know. I'm not mad at you. I'm frustrated that people can't wait 5 seconds to hit send. So that's one of the things you look for when you buy a motherboard, is how many USBs can connect to it, because we use USBs for everything anymore, right? There's nothing, we don't hook up printers to a printer port. We don't have gamer ports like we used to have to hook up a joystick to. Everything connects up through USB anymore. And you can see this one has SATAs down here as well as SATAs up here as well. And then we've got our expansion slots back here. We've got really 3 kinds of expansion slots that are used anymore on motherboards. And those are this is a bad one. I'm going to go past this one. Well, I'll show you. The old, whoa, I got an AGP port. The old good video card was called an AGP slot for advanced graphics port. Okay? But PCI Express 16s made the AGP port go away. Okay? Through the evolution of expansion ports, we had PCI and AGP together, just like we do on this one. And then PCI Express came out, and you can see that we've got these 2 PCI Express X1. X1 means that they came out at this speed. That's the base speed. And then X4 meant, hey, it's 4 times faster than the first one we got. And then X8 is, it's 8 times faster than that one. And now we're at 16 times faster. And when the PCI Express 16 ports came out, AGP just went away, because it was so much faster throughput. Okay, so that's what that port is, and I'm not going to ask you any questions on that one. Let me go to a new one over here. A new motherboard. This one's got AGP too. Let me go to. Hopefully, I've got the next one doesn't. Okay, there we go. So different motherboard again. The north bridge is visibly larger heat sink than the south bridge, but really this is the basic expansion card slots that we've got now. We've got PCI Express slots. We've got regular PCI slots. Those are the standard. Does anybody know what PCI stands for? Peripheral Component Interconnect. In other words, plug in place. Okay? Peripheral meaning an outside thing, not part of the motherboard. A peripheral component means part. Okay, interconnect, in other words, plug. Okay, I don't know who came up with the name, but so PCI stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect. These are the original PCI slots, and then we got PCI Express, which are faster than PCI, and they weren't called X1 when they came out, right? Just like CD-ROMs weren't called X52s, right? But they had a base speed, and as soon as we got faster, we did everything talked about in multiples of that base speed. Just like a CD-ROM X52 means it's 52 times faster than the original CD-ROM that came out. What is that? I don't know. You can look up that number. It's just a way to easily compare. And then we've got our PCI Express X16 slot, which is 16 times faster. And there is always a primary that is our primary video card slot. And then we've got other ones that add on. And you know that from your own PowerPoint presentations, the other ones may not be 16s. The next one may look just like it. It's still a PCI Express 16 slot. In other words, a full-size PCI Express slot, but this one's really an X8. That's why your primary's here, and your secondary video card is not going to talk as fast. okay? But if you have them talking in SLI, it really doesn't matter because they're really talking through the 16 still. And this one's talking to this one through the SLI connection, and they're working as one. So it's not like you're really getting a secondary one that's slower unless you don't have an SLI because you're trying to push 4 displays or something. You're trying to push multiple monitors out, which people do. And honestly, SLI, you can still do that too. If you had 2, I guess, different video cards that you're trying to do the same thing. And then we've got our back panel stuff, and I've got some better pictures of the back panel here coming up here. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the other ones. Oh, I wanted to stop here and talk about SATA versus PATA and talk about those numbers that kind of got confused when you guys were talking about them. Okay, so the little b means bit, okay? So the original SATA came out and it ran at 1.5 gigabits per second, and it had a throughput of 150 megabytes per second. So that's how much information came through it. And you know, they like to say the G number, and the reason they like to say the G number because it's a giga and it sounds much bigger than a mega. Okay, but really you could talk about SATA 1 in either way. You could talk about how many gigabits per second the interface is, or you could talk about how many megabytes the actual throughput is on the cable when it's transferring data. Okay, so that it's the same base number, it's just different tens, right? Okay, so the throughput is actually 150 megabytes per second, and then at SATA 2 it doubled to 300 megabytes per second, and then SATA 3 we're up to 600 megabytes per second. And back down at PATA, we were running at max at 1 gigabit or 100 megabytes mostly. And I have on here that really there were variations. It came out, when PATA came out, it came out at 33, and then it changed to 66. And then really 100 was the standard, but they made a couple that were 133. And then all of a sudden SATA came out and they gave up, right? So they're like, we can't keep up with this because the best they could get was 133 and the first generation came out at 150. So it was like, we'll use this one. It's a better interface. And not only that, the other problem with the PATA interface, it got up to 133 megabytes per second, but at the same time, you're putting 2 devices on it. Okay, so the cable itself, when it came to, this is the part that's plugged into the motherboard. This is going to get 133 megabytes per second, but I got 2 things plugged into it. And if I'm copying from my CD-ROM to my hard drive, am I really even getting that speed? Because it's going to the motherboard. It's not like it goes bloop to there, right? It goes to the motherboard and then it comes back to my CD-ROM. So I'm really getting half that speed because I'm sharing that data over this one cable, which is why SATA really felt a lot faster than PATA because I wasn't sharing anymore. All that speed right there went to one hard drive or one CD-ROM. And not that PATA was terrible, but if you guys saw the same machine, we had all these had PATA hard drives in them. And the minute we started putting in SATAs, they really felt faster. Okay, just like when we put in SSDs, the machines felt even faster still. So that's the difference between SATA and PATA. You can see on this one, well, you can't really see it, but the CD-ROM I've got hooked up with PATA cable. CD-ROMs don't read that fast. There's nothing wrong with using PATA if you've got PATA available. I have an extra, PATA slot. I had an old PATA CD-ROM or DVD. Why not use it? Okay, so it's not like you throw those things away. But I wouldn't use them for a hard drive anymore. And then we've got Amd drives, and Amd drives use the PGA socket. This is an AMD right here. It's a quad-core AMD. It's an old server. It's got a PGA socket underneath there. And we'll talk more about AMD versus Intel when we get to that section. AMD has gone back and forth with Intel with who's faster. It's never really gone back and forth with who's a better value. AMD's always cheaper. I'm going to say 90% of the time. I say always, okay? And that's because how many AMD commercials have you ever seen in your life? None. Okay? It's something that IT professionals and OEMs use, but it's not something that home consumer goes up and goes, man, I really want an AMD CPU in this computer. They don't even know what that means. Okay? So we've got the same thing. We get the same back panel on a PGA, and you guys saw from your presentations, really the only difference is when I'm looking at it, Asus and Gigabyte, they make AMDs, they make Intel-based motherboards, and they're very, very similar motherboards. Is there anything when you look at this that you're like, I don't know what that is when I look at a motherboard? Because really that's the whole point of today, is making sure.
On this one, I'm just not sure what the circle thing in the middle that says Gigabyte is. Is that just like a embellishment?
No, that's just part of this is all part of that heat sink, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not like a plug or anything like that. And I do want to, since I didn't mention it yet, the Cmos Battery, again, does what? What does that do?
Keeps the BIOS running.
Right, it keeps our BIOS configuration saved in Cmos RAM. Okay, so that's going to be a question that comes back, and it's going to be something as far as your application going forward. You know, when we get a laptop that comes in for the hardware kid, or for the tech kids, and they're having to reset up the BIOS. I'm like, what are you doing? The BIOS, I have to reset it up. It wasn't saved. So what did you do first? The first thing you should do if you're having to reset up the BIOS is not reset up the BIOS, because why do you have to reset the BIOS ever? Because the battery's dead. So don't just reset up the BIOS, because you're going to do it next time the battery dies, okay? Because realistically, in a laptop, as long as the battery has any power at all on it, it doesn't clear out the BIOS. Okay, there's still some power on the motherboard, as long as there's a battery in there. But as soon as they pull out the battery and it's unplugged, and this is dead, it's kaput. Kaput. So if that happens, you know that you probably need a new battery. In many desktops, it will warn you, battery power low, and say F2 to continue or something. And then, you know, teachers just go hit F2 because they don't know what that means. What? I don't have a battery. Hey, you got a battery. Okay. So changing the Cmos battery is pretty easy. It's also easy to break a motherboard doing the Cmos battery. I've had several students break a motherboard. It's just a little tiny clip right here. You just have to take a little tiny flathead and push it ever so gently, and the thing just goes boom, because there's a spring right underneath there. So when you put it in, there's a little bracket on this side that it goes under. It's kind of like little fingers, and you put it under there, and then you just push it down, and it snaps in. And as soon as you push this back, it pops right out. But what do they try to do? They try to pull back these plastic brackets, and they break them, because that's what plastic does when you try to force it to bend backwards, and it's been heated to over 100 degrees multiple times. Plastic on a motherboard is brittle on an older motherboard, right? But all it was is a little piece of metal. All you do is, and it pop right out. So, just so you know. Okay, and all these things, what are all these things? Isaac, what are those? We're paying hangman, Isaac. I gave you the first two letters. Capacitors, right. You're excellent. Good catch on that. Okay, those are capacitors. And who was it that gave the, I did it again. Dang it. Who was it that gave the presentation that said, hey, we have the best capacitors, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Ian did. Capacitors are those small things that look like batteries from the side. That's what all of these are right here. Okay, capacitors hold an electrical charge. There's the bigger capacitors right there, and inside a power supply, there's really big capacitors in there, which is why they say don't work on the inside of a power supply, because they hold power in them, and on a power supply, the capacitor is big enough that you could harm yourself. Just like on big TVs, they used to have big warnings on them, do not work with professionals only, because they had huge capacitors in there, and people could kill themselves if they had just unplugged the TV and the capacitor is fully charged on the power that was saved in it. Okay, so capacitors, we're not doing electrical engineering here, right? Capacitors, just so you know, they hold a charge or maintain a very specific voltage at a specific spot on the motherboard. And you can see they're all over. And if a capacitor goes bad, your motherboard is ruined, okay? And unfortunately, I don't have one sitting out that shows you, but if you look at the top of these capacitors, see the little X's on the top? Those are breakpoints, okay? Intentional breakpoints, so that if a capacitor overheats, it doesn't explode out on the side. What it does is it pops straight up through that. I know I've got at least one with a bad capacitor. We had one set of motherboards that they went out all of the time, and the chance of me not having one motherboard with a bad capacitor is probably 0. There we go. So when a capacitor overheats and goes bad, it breaks at that top X spot. It's the weak spot on purpose. And then you see the chemical gooing out, right? And actually this might still work, but it might be now kind of intermittent, sometimes has blue screens or whatever, problems with it. But the reason they make it so it comes out on top, so theoretically Isaac with his delicate touch would be able to go underneath here and unsolder that and pull out this capacitor and put a new one in and repair this motherboard. Okay, nobody does that because it's really, really hard to solder on a motherboard successfully, okay? In fact, the flashing 9 that we have, problem that we have on laptops occasionally, in my opinion, well, it says CPU or other problem. Well, it's never fixed it by doing anything with the CPU. So I think it's a bad capacitor issue. So just so you know what those are, those circles are on there as well. Okay. So USB, we've got different kind of USB connections. It's the most prevalent connection that we have on our computer, so it's important to understand the differences in speeds. USB 1.0 is almost a thing of the past. Most of the ones, did anybody have a USB 1.0 put on yours? You just had 2s and 3s, right? Look at the difference between 1 and 2. Zowie Batman, that is a big difference. So if you put in a USB on a computer and it says this device could perform faster on a USB 2.0, yeah, it happens every once in a while. You put it in an older computer like these, have USB 1.0s on them, and it'll give you a warning that this device could perform faster. Well, it's not saying it could perform a little bit faster, okay? How much faster is that? Let's see, 300 times faster? Is that right? I'm doing let's see. Let's do, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to use my little calculator because that's what we do, right? Calculator, 480 divided by 1.5. 480 divided by 1.5 equals 320 times faster. Okay, 300 was a good round number. 320 times faster. That's a heck of a lot faster right there, okay? And then from USB 2 to USB 3, not that much faster. It's 6 times faster. Is that right? 6? 5? No, 10. Or basically 10 times faster. Maybe 11 times faster. Okay, because this is basically 0.5, right? Going to 5. So about 10 times faster. But the difference between 300 times faster and 10 times faster is still faster. There's a reason to have a USB 3.0, and you can see 3.1 doubled in speed again. And I only said one of yours that had 3.1 ports, didn't I? Most of you had 2.0s and 3.0s. Is that correct? And why do I need that many 3.0s? Am I typing that fast? No. Is my mouse moving that fast? No. I don't need all 3.0 ports. Okay? There might be a couple places where a 3.0 would be awesome, i.e., when I'm putting in my flash drive and I want to, if I've got a 3.0 capable flash drive, yes, it's going to be 10 times faster. It's going to be able to read and write information from my flash drive. Or an external hard drive, yes, it's going to make a difference. But for 90% of the things you guys plug into USB, it's not going to make any difference at all. Which is why they're not all USB 3.0. Okay? But you can tell the difference. USB 3.0 is what color? Blue. Okay? That could be a test question. USB 3, but just like I asked you what color is PS2, green versus purple on the keyboard, it's important. Everybody remember what mouse is? Green. Okay, keyboard is purple. Okay? It's important to know because you should be able to plug in the right thing at the right spot. If I'm plugging in my speakers, I plug it into green.
Okay.
Good job, Mr. Plankenhorn. Yes, because that will be on the test as well because you've done all this stuff on the motherboard. You should know how to plug stuff into it. And we're going to talk about the back here in a second. So that's the differences in USBs. Important to know. Okay. When I plug USB on the inside, it could be very, very simple, or it could be a huge pain in the butt. The first PCs I built were like this, and I had to go and hand line up every single pin as I put it in here, one at a time, to get it to go in. Why the heck did they do that to me? I don't know, because they all come in rows of 2. Why can't they all be like that? Which is the ones you guys plugged in, right? Nice and easy, just a blunk right in there. And they all have one spot where there is no hole, and there's one spot where there is no pin, so make sure you put the no hole where the no pin is, or you will scrunch a pin down and ruin the USB connection. Okay? So that's one of those things when you plug it in, you have to look very carefully. Now this one has 5 holes both ways, and you have to make sure you've got the right one on the right side. One of them just doesn't do anything. Okay? So this one again is like this. I mean, look at this. I mean, you have to read every single one of these. You have to look at the chart and go, okay, I got to put the ground, and I got to put the ground. And by the way, I have to make sure all the ones that go to one are with all the ones that go to the other. So if I went ground, ground, and then plus, plus, it wouldn't work. So when we built our first PCs in my Computer 1 class, actually that was Computer 2 class, that was the first thing we tested. And most of the time, over 75% of the time, USB didn't work because this was a pain in the butt to get them in correctly. But it's nice if you get ones like that. You can have multiple USB connections on your motherboard. You can have 10 on the outside and have another 5 or 6 on the inside that you could then put even more USBs to. Don't know why you would need that many USBs, but you could. I don't know why I put this slide in here. Oh, maybe just to show the USB connections. I don't know, since I was just talking USB. They don't always have those brackets around the outside. They don't always have this. Sometimes they're just the pins, and you have to read that says USB, USB. It doesn't matter whether you plug it into 1 or 2. When you're plugging your front side, you don't know which one you're plugged into. When you put in your flash drive, it just shows up as whatever. Okay? So this one in particular, we've got what processor manufacturer? Intel, right? We've got 2 RAM slots. This one takes what kind of RAM?
DDR3.
Okay, it's right on the motherboard. It takes DDR3, and it says 133 OC. I'd have to look it up to see what all speeds it takes. I don't know. Maybe it's recommending that you overclock this motherboard with DDR3 133, but at least I know it's DDR3. Just from looking at it, how many PCI X1 slots does it have, Brandon?
2.
Find them.
It's the far 2.
These 2?
Yeah.
No, that's PCI X1. This is PCI. PCI. The difference is all the X's, X1, X4, X8, X16, all have the same lineup right here at the beginning. And the standard PCIs are the opposite in the back, which is why you can't put a PCI in a PCI X slot. But you can put a PCI X16 into a PCI X1 slot, and vice versa. They just will perform at that speed, depending on the card, because some cards don't have the cutout here. We actually took these, I don't have any, the 780s, and put they only have one PCI Express 16 slot. And we took a Dremel tool, and we cut out that little notch right there, and put a PCI X16 video card right in there, and it worked just fine. At that speed, okay? But it worked just fine. The hard part was to cut this out without ruining the motherboard. We actually found out it was easier to do the opposite. I ended up, instead of cutting that out, I should have kept all those video cards. I took the Dremel tool and I cut this entire connection off the video card. So the only thing left was that. and they worked just fine. That's how all the ones in Studebaker's room were working when we had the multi-point lab set up in there. Because what we did was we had servers, and we wanted 4 machines to go per server, and each one of these pushed 2 machines, so that we could cut down the number of servers in there. But they only had one PCI X16, so we went and I cut all those off. We tried it once, we plugged it in there, and it worked hunky-dory. And then I did a whole bunch of cards every once in a while. I ruined one and I threw it away, but you see I got a little bit of them, so I was able to. But just so you know, they are cross-compatible provided the thing plugs in. It's just what speed do you get out of it when you do that. I was actually really, really surprised that that worked. Mr. Anderson said I read that it would, and I didn't believe him, and so I cut one up and it worked. Like, you're right, okay. Again, North Bridge, South Bridge. Big, huge North Bridge on this one. Intel processor, little tiny South Bridge down here when I look at that one. Okay, back panel connectors. We already said this. That's supposed to be green, not a very good picture. Mouse is green, keyboard's purple. Keyboard's purple. If I've got this divided, green and purple, what's that mean? Either one. You can do either one. So if you've got a PS2 thing that you want to plug in, then you can do either one on there. Here's our standard VGA port, which is also called what?
Video.
Yeah, you guys had it on yours. It was called the D sub. Isn't that what it was called? The D sub port? Isn't that what it was also called on some of your guys's? Your presentation's not mine. So we got VGA, we've got DVI, we've got HDMI down here. Which ones are the better of those 3? Which one would I rather not use if I had the choice?
VGA.
Yeah, I'd rather not use VGA, right? Because it's an analog signal, and I'd rather use my digital signal because my digital signal is going to be clearer, it's going to be better. What else do I get with HDMI besides video?
Audio.
Yeah, you get audio too, so that's why I get sound out of my LCD projector overhead, because it's hooked up with an HDMI and it's got HDMI sound on there. I told you guys what this one was last class. What is that?
The one with the big subwoofer.
Yeah, it's the thing that you plug the stereo system in.
Yeah, that's this diff, but it's a fiber optic sound cable. And it does all the sound, not just the subwoofer. It does the whole thing. It does all the channels on one cable. So if you've got a sound system that has an input that looks just like that, you could easily get one cable instead of doing all these to try to get good sound. You can do one cable and it does it all. And there's no static. It's fiber optic. There's no way to have any kind of interference. So it's as good a sound as you're going to get
They have
by doing that.
My Xbox, I know they have one on those. 'Cause
I wouldn't doubt
my,
that.
My headset, I used to have to plug it in to get the sound into my headphones.
Okay. Let's see. What are these? USB. They're red. What does that mean? I don't know what red means, but I know what this means.
3.0.
3.0, right? This is my Ethernet for my LAN connection. Anybody know what that is? Okay, that one is called FireWire. FireWire is a connection used by cameras mostly. Sony came out with FireWire connection when we were back on USB 1.0 because it was 50 times faster than USB 1.0. And yes?
Is this Mr. Bull?
Yes?
I have your fruit down here that you ordered from Jacob Gardner. I'm in the elementary cafeteria.
Okay, so you gonna deliver it? Or
He didn't remember it today, so I didn't know if you want me to get it to you somehow up there later, and exactly where your room is. Don't forget, it's up there.
oh, I'm in 203. Yeah. You can just set it on a table in there if I'm not in the room. Okay. Okay, bye. Why is he not delivering? You guys are supposed to deliver that. Not, hey, come down and get it from here. Anyway, so FireWire came out when USB 1.0 was around because it was 50 times faster than USB 1.0, and it was to transfer your video and your pictures off of your Sony camera. And I say Sony because they're the ones who used it the most. Okay? Is there any reason to use FireWire anymore?
No.
No, unless that's the only dang connection your camera has. And I have a couple expansion PCI cards for FireWire because I've had staff members say, there's no way to hook up mine into your computer. And so I have some FireWire cards. That is, to me, old tech. But some people have cameras that they have to be able to use it with. So that's what that's for. Anybody know what that is?
I don't know.
I've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it before.
And Hangman again.
It's
Okay, it's an eSATA port. What's that mean? It's an external SATA port. So if you wanted to hook up an external hard drive to this computer, the fastest way to do it is eSATA. Now, 3.0, USB 3.0, it's probably pretty close. I don't know the exact speeds there. But eSATA talks at SATA speed, so we'd have to look at those charts that we just had on USB on which one would actually be faster. Let's see. Let's go back real fast. So 3.0 does 8, SATA does 6 gigabits per second. So if it's a SATA 3 external SATA, it's going to be faster than a USB 3.0, but slower than a USB 3.1. So eSATA is to hook up your external SATA drive to, and then obviously we have these audio connections. The biggest ones that you guys need to know are these three. Green is
no.
what?
And
Just ask this question. Green is what?
audio?
Your speakers. Your speakers.
Oh yeah.
Green is speakers. Okay. I'm gonna have to add a new one. Okay. So the green plug is for
Speakers.
speakers. Okay. Speakers. Okay, and that we're gonna pretend this is the color pink. Pink plug. Actually, I probably can do pink. There we go. Now I got pink. Okay. So the pink plug is the
And
what?
in
Huh?
line in? Oh, microphone.
Microphone. Yeah, good job. Microphone. Okay. Those are the two most common ones used all over the place. Okay. Now we used to use the blue one. We don't use the blue one anymore, but we used to use the blue one. The blue one was, that's not really blue, that's kind of teal. Let's see if I can get a better blue. That's really too dark, but we'll say that's right. The blue one is
Line in?
line in. Yes, okay, is the line in. So what is line in used for? Well, one of the things that we used to use the line in for is
Where he goes.
things over here. Okay, this is a TV card right here. Okay, you plug in your coax cable right here, and you get TV on your computer. Okay, all the teachers have them. They don't have this one anymore because the one thing that it had was this crappy hookup that most of the time when it didn't work, it's because of user error with it. But the one thing it didn't do was audio to the computer. So you had to take, and right here, what's it say right on there? Audio out. You had to take, and put this, it came with all these little cables. You had to take an audio out cable from here and plug it into the blue line in there. So this would do the video, and the video would come to your computer, but to get to audio, you had to have this little line out going to this little line in on the back of the PC. And teacher would be like, I don't know what that is, and they pull it out, and then all of a sudden they have no sound, and I'd go down there, and they go, oh, I never had one of those in my computer. And it's like, look, every single one of these went over the line-in cable. So that's the only thing we've ever used that line-in cable for. You obviously could use it for other things. If you had a cassette player that you want to digitize the sound and turn it into an MP3 file, which we have teachers that still do that are like, I need to turn this into something else. You can hook a cassette player up and put the sound out into the line in and hit record on a recording piece of software and turn it into an MP3 file. Okay, so now we know, because we should know. Speakers, mic, audio in, okay, for our back panel plugs. You will get questions like this matching, but I won't match them all. The number D, does anybody know what D is over there?
It's the VGA.
Is not.
Oh, yeah.
E is VGA.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I don't know. D.
Okay, D is called a serial port. It is a communications port that you can plug in. I'm not going to ask you D, but I'm going to tell you what D is. D is a serial connector port that basically I can plug into that and then plug into certain devices to talk to them, to their hardware. Okay, so I don't have any switches up over here anymore, but on all of our switches in our closet, I can talk directly to the switch and reprogram the switch. But I have to have a laptop with a serial port because I have a serial to Ethernet cable that came with it in order to talk to that device. Very few things have serial anymore. In fact, I have to keep an old laptop sitting on top of the switches that I can use to do exactly that because very few have that port. Anybody know what K is?
Parallel.
Yeah, what's up? You're right. It's parallel port. What's that for?
I don't know. I just don't
You just said you heard serial, so you're going with parallel because we know those two words. Anybody know what it's for? This is what printers always used to connect for. This is a parallel port, and it's what printers connect up with. We used to have a big, huge, wide cable on this side that would plug in, and then, in fact, I have somebody I know that's trying to find a new. He's got a Windows 95 machine still at home, and the only printer that will work with Windows 95, because Windows 95 didn't do USB. USB didn't come out until Windows 98 Second Edition. That's when USB 1.0 was introduced. Even Windows 98 didn't have it. You had to have Second Edition of Windows 98. It's kind of like Windows 8.1. 98, 98 Second Edition all of a sudden fixed everything. Okay, so those two things really are of no use anymore, and we've gone through all the other ones on the back there, so I don't need to rehash those, and I don't think I need to rehash this one either, and we've been through all these. Anybody questions? I'm going to just move ahead. I had a whole bunch of pictures on these, but we already talked about all those, and I don't want to run out of time before we talk about the other stuff. Okay, so here's Pci Express. Like I said, Pci Express all has this little notch in the front, and PCI X1 were the originals, and those are the speeds right there that they transfer at. And you can see, so it started at 2.5 gigabits per second, or 200 megabytes per second, and then it got 4 times faster than that. It's a slightly bigger one. You don't even see those anymore. I don't see any motherboards with 4s or 8s, because we went from 1s to 4s to 8s to 16s, and then we realized that anything that plugs into that can plug into that, anything that plugs into that can plug into that, so why don't I just make them this and this, and that's it. And we use those. We have network cards that go into PCI Express 1 slots on many of our servers. So that's the difference in the speeds. I started at 2.5 and went to 10, then I went to 20, and then we went up to 40 on the X16. So you can see the difference. If I had a video card, and like I said, there are X8s that are full size from, you guys know from your own presentations, that it said slot number 1, PCI X1 is 16, X2 is 8, and some of them went all the way down to 4, but the size of the slot didn't change. There was just no reason to do that anymore. So this is what they look like, and usually the one closest to the CPU, why would it be closest to the CPU, is the primary.
Because I get the information.
Yeah, it's going to get it fastest, right? It has to have a primary. And so the one that's X16 is the one, and I'm assuming the CPU is up here because I see connectors down here. So the one closest to the CPU is going to be the X16, and it's going to be the X16 because it has to get the information the fastest. Okay, so it's going to be the closest. So you can see here's the X1, X16 or 8. It does both speeds. This one's just an 8, and these are the regular PCI slots here. You can see the notches in the back versus the notch in the front on the PCI Express ones. And actually, this one does have a third one. It's kind of dark. You can't barely see it down there. Is one it only talks at X4, but again, it's a full size one. So you could still put, just like I can put that video card and cut it down and put it in an X1, I can put the same video card down here. It fits just fine. It's only talking at 4. Now it's talking at 8. Now it's talking at 16 or 8, depending on what you've got hooked in. And this one maybe sometimes this is 16 unless you put in 2, and now they're both talking at 8 because it can't do the speed any other way. Yes, I saw a hand. It went down. Your question went away. Okay, another picture at cards. It used to be everything was extremely color-coded. PCIs were always this cream color. AGPs were always actually this brown color. This is not AGP, this is PCI. And the older one, which I guess I wouldn't even mention that one, but they were black, so they're called ESA. So anyway, so when I look through here, if I was to ask you again, which one is the primary video card, if there was nothing else, no other information given, because I can't even see the name of the motherboard on here, right? But if I can't do anything else, I'm going to assume it's the one closest to the CPU. Now, the fact that this one's colored completely different may mean something, and I would have to look at the motherboard manual to see why. But I'm going to guess that it's this and this one are the two that they're asking you to SLI together if you're going to connect two together. Okay? And just so you know, when they're close like this, really they're not both usable. If you put a video card in this slot that's of any quality whatsoever, it's going to cover this one up completely. And that's not going to be a usable slot. Another one, same thing, you're not going to be able to use this one. By the way, all these are different locks in the back. These latches right here latch onto the back of our PCI Express video cards. These are obviously very small video cards, but they can get ginormous. My son's one card has 4 cooling bands on it, but they lock underneath that little spot right there. Because if they're a big, huge one, the last thing you want is this thing coming loose at all. Because if it does come loose while it's running, it could very well fry this and then it's ruined. And if you spent $600 on this video card, not this one obviously, you'd be very, very unhappy. So when these go down in here, this latch closes just like memory does, and it goes in there, and then you have to open that up by pushing down on this in order to pull this out again. That's what that latch is. And the latches look different on different motherboards. This is a different latch that you have to push down to get that open. Okay. Talked a little bit about this already. Chipset controls the flow of information around the motherboard, and it's what sets kind of the stage for how fast things get to it. And I've got some graphics on my North Bridge, South Bridge, okay? The kids on the North Bridge are going to get to school faster because they only have 2 stops. The kids in the South Bridge, well, they live way out and who knows where. And they're going to get to go to school slower because they have to make so many stops. The school being the CPU in this analogy, okay? So because it's not necessarily faster, but it transfers far more information, particularly from the memory, right? It's using the memory all the time, nonstop. Video card too, if you're playing a game or doing something video intensive. But all these other things, it doesn't do nearly at the same speed. So they're all kind of mushed together on the South Bridge, or the south route, and just the video and memory on the north one. Another picture showing just that what we talked about, and obviously it's not a path just like that. Here's another graphic kind of showing the same thing, that on the North Bridge you've got all your memory slot, you've got your PCI Express slot, and then on the South Bridge you've got all the other PCI slots, and everything else that connects up to your PC goes through the South Bridge. Okay. The last thing, I think this last thing that I wanted to talk about is the bus itself. Okay, so when we talk about bus, when I make the school bus analogy, you can have a short bus or you can have a big bus, and the difference is how much gets on the bus as it makes the trip, thereby changing how many trips has to go around to get the same thing back, right? If we had all short buses in National Trail, we would either take twice as long we would take, if we had all short buses, same number of buses, it would take us twice as long to get all the kids to school. So we'd have to make multiple trips, right? So we get the biggest bus we can so we can get everybody here the fastest. So the bus determines how much information is in every single packet. And it's normally defined or called the width of the bus. Okay? It determines how much data can be transmitted at one time. So a 16-bit bus can do 16 bits at one time. A 32-bit bus can do 32 bits at one time. A 64-bit bus can do 64 bits of information at one time. So we've evolved from way back when we had an 8-bit bus to a 16-bit bus, and then a 32-bit bus, and now a 64-bit bus. I don't think we'll go any bigger because really at 64 bits we don't even use all the bus all the time. Okay? Because you can't send half information. You kind of send a packet of information, and how many packets get on the bus? But at 64, you kind of get to the point where there are empty seats on the bus, oft times in the 64-bit bus. So I don't think we're going to ever see a 128-bit bus, but who knows? I could be wrong. So you can see that the speeds go up as the bus gets bigger because information can flow faster. The big thing now, we're at 32 and 64, is determining what you want to have on your computer. Okay? All of the machines we have at National Trail, and really everything you can buy anymore, is capable of 32 or 64. Okay? They can do either ones. So there's a limitation on a 32-bit machine. It can only see 4 gig of memory. And as this says on here, really Windows can only see 3.5. Okay? So if you put in 4 gig of RAM, Windows is going to see 3.5 of that because of address limitations of Windows itself. It's only going to see 3.5 gig of that. And then if you have one of those motherboards that steals memory from the system to do the video RAM, then maybe you're down to 2.5. Many of you guys did presentations that steals 1 meg of RAM for video, right, on your motherboard presentations. So really then it would show that you only have 2.5 if you went and did the Windows pause break thing and saw how much RAM. Because when we do that, I don't think this, didn't I say this doesn't work on mine? I don't think it does. When we do the Windows pause break to see the system properties, here, I'm going to do it on this one. Maybe, there we go. When we do the Windows pause break and see the system properties, right here it says installed memory, 4 gig, 3.7 gig usable. Okay, it really is, so I've got physically 4 in there. I put the wrong OS on here. I meant to put a 64-bit, right? But it says how much is actually usable of that. I really thought it was putting. I'll have to reimage it later. But if you've got 64-bit, you can see everything. And you'd think, well, why don't I just use 64-bit on everything? Because if you only have 2 gig of RAM, which is what the student laptops have, then 64-bit would be a waste. 1. Number 2, drivers do what? We talked about drivers.
The control software.
Yeah, well, the software that controls hardware.
Yeah.
Drivers are programs that make hardware work. And in many times, there are no 64-bit drivers for older legacy hardware. For instance, that video camera right there on top of my network switch on the wall will not work on a 64-bit machine. Microsoft never made drivers for it. So if I had a 64-bit machine right there, that camera would not work at all. That one's 32 and this one's 64. That one's 32 because it's exactly the same as what the teachers had. I want one machine that's exactly the same. The other one's not. So you have to think about how much memory do I have available to me, and do I need drivers that only 32-bit will hold? Almost all new stuff has 64-bit drivers because really we've moved to 64-bit being the standard of everything new that comes out, including cell phones. Cell phones are going to 64-bit as well. Whether or not cell phones really need to go to 64-bit, I think it sounds really neat, and that's what they did to just make it sound like they made a major upgrade. Most of them don't have enough memory to make that big of a difference. Okay, let's see. Is there anything I missed that we didn't talk about? That you're like, hey, let's do this. Why don't we take a look at the that's not what I wanted, wrong one. Let's take a look at chapter 4. How long has it been since we did the I can statements? Okay, I can look at motherboard, know the basic parts, expansion slots, CPU socket, memory slots. I'm looking at everybody through time. I'm looking at 29 instead of just you guys. Let's go back to 2017, and I haven't deleted any of your old selections, so it still says 15 up there. I can look more sales site, determine speed and usage of the motherboard. Does anybody feel like they can't do that? When I say speeds and usage, basically you're going to look at a motherboard and I'm going to say, this Asus motherboard would fit best into home, business, or gamer category. And you have to look at it and say, okay, what are the requirements of, and I would work my way backwards. I would say, what are the requirements of the gamer? How many PCI Express does it have to be a gamer? Minimum 2. It only has 1. It's not a gamer. I just threw that out. Okay. Now, does it work for a home PC or a business PC? What does a business PC require? Okay. First of all, it has to have all integrated. And by the way, one of the options is going to be none. So, does it have integrated video? What if it didn't? Would it fit into any of these that I just said? No. If it has one PCI and no integrated, it doesn't fit into any of them because it's not a gamer, it's not a business, it's not a home. Because home and business have to have integrated video, all integrated components, so we can build it less expensively. What was the difference? And I'll have this link, by the way, still open for you guys to be able to look at the PowerPoint projects. If you're like, I don't really remember, you'll still be able to go down, where are we at? There, right there. You'll still be able to go down and look at this and say, what's the difference between these? And I have to change this to SATA 6. I'm going to change that before we get out of here so I don't forget. Okay, so this one had no requirements. So if it all of a sudden has only SATA 1 ports, which is almost impossible to find anymore, right? Then it would only work for this. But as long as it's got these things, then it's really business PC. So I want you to think of it in reverse order. Does it fit in the best category? No. Does it fit in the second best category? Yes or no. And then finally, does it fit in the home PC? And then it might not fit into any, right? Okay. And I might be tricky, and I might give you an ITX motherboard. Read the form factor on the site, okay? If it says, if I say, hey, I'm rebuilding my son's PC, it's a standard ATX case, and it uses standard blah, 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 will this motherboard work? And I give you a motherboard that says right away it's a BTX motherboard, the answer is no. It's got to be the right form factor, okay? I will ask you questions like, I want to put this memory in this motherboard, will it work? And all you have to do is go to the motherboard and read the specifications. It takes DDR3, 1333 to 2100, and I give you a link to a DDR2. No. Okay? Or I give you a link to a DDR3, but it's the wrong speed, no or yes. Okay? So I can explain the speed of a motherboard frontside bus. Hopefully you can now. Basically, it's the speed that the motherboard syncs up with the RAM. Okay? So you look at what the variations of memory are for that motherboard, and you know what the front side bus will, and really we're talking about the north bridge, but it's referred as the front side bus, what speed that will communicate at. Okay, I know where the parts of the PC are and how to connect them to the motherboard. Okay, we just went through that extensively. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. I can match the CPU with the appropriate motherboard given the CPU type and the internet access. Anybody think they can't do that? Same thing. I'm going to give you a CPU and I'm going to give you a motherboard. Will these work together? And you need to go to the motherboard first and see what CPUs it takes, and then just go read the CPU. Is it one of them? Then yes. If not, if it's not listed, then the answer is no. I can use BIOS on various systems to give you your CMOS. Not something we can do in the test, obviously, right? And hopefully, I know it says some no's, but hopefully you guys do know how to do those basic configurations. There's not a lot of things. Now there's some advanced things that we don't ever cover in this course on things that you can do in BIOS. Not covered yet, not covered yet, not covered yet. That's on the second part of the chapter, which we're not going to get to before finals this year. So I don't know how I got behind, but I did. I really don't know how I got this far behind. But we'll catch up. We'll do double assignments after Christmas. I'm just kidding. So, questions? Anything on this section that you don't understand? I'm going to put your grades in, by the way, for your PowerPoint presentations while I'm doing plan next block. So I'll put those in. For you and Cody were the two that had to redo. Okay, so you're getting zeros for the two sections that you did the wrong ones. But as soon as you give me a new one that has the right ones, that grade will change. Okay, so realize, and if your mom goes and hits you at night or something and say, "Mom, I'm doing it right now," okay. In fact, I might put in the comments what your grade had been if you had. I'm going to put the real grade in, but I'm going to put in the comments the grade you would have had if you would have picked the right motherboard for your presentation. Okay, so the rest of the CPU stuff, it's actually going to be a pretty short amount of discussion after Christmas, and then you're going to do your CPU project, because really the explanation of the CPU stuff that are left down here is one day. Okay, and then you're going to do projects, and then we're going to present those, and then we'll do the CPU test, and it'll be very small because usually it's all together in one chapter. But I couldn't try to squish it in real fast for the end of the semester. Okay, so test is next class. Nobody has questions? That worked out pretty well as far as timing. I wish Cody had been here, but hopefully he watches the video and gets the review on his own. If nobody has any questions, I'm gonna stop the recording. No?